Okay, let's unpack this. We are starting this deep dive not with a piece of paper, not a financial report, or even, a witness statement.
Hmm.
We're starting with a profoundly unsettling discovery in the remote south of France. It's November 2010, near the historic city of Perpignan.
And the scene was it was deeply disturbing. It suggested not panic, but something cold, something deliberate, staged.
Stage, that's a good word for it.
French authorities found two separate bundles, professionally and really meticulously concealed.
And they weren't together.
No, they were located about 2 kilometers apart. One body was behind a bush in a quiet field. The other was dumped on a remote forest path embankment, kind of near a river.
And when the authorities approached these bundles, it wasn't immediately obvious what they were, was it?
Not at all. They were just heavy, completely wrapped up.
The kind of thing that suggests the person who put them there wanted to guarantee they would never, ever be found.
Absolutely. The bodies were wrapped first in towels, then heavy blankets. Then they were sealed inside these thick black plastic bags and just tightly secured with duct tape.
But the most important layer, the detail that would crack this whole thing open.
They were wrapped in heavy, expensive Persian carpets.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This level of preparation, of concealment, it immediately told the police they were dealing with a high-stakes crime. This was likely premeditated.
An attempt to erase their identities permanently.
For sure. The autopsy confirmed the bodies were two male victims, a father, estimated to be around 60, and his son, around 30, both killed by headshots.
But the most perplexing part was the complete lack of information.
A total blank slate. No IDs, no driver's licenses, no credit cards, and critically, nothing in the French missing persons system matched.
So the investigation was stalled before it even really began.
Completely.
So the victims were silent. The scene itself was silent. But the killer, in their haste to make two people disappear forever,
They missed a vital detail.
the packaging itself, it spoke a different language.
Specifically, it spoke German.
Ah.
That was the first crucial insight. The French investigators noted German labels on the victims' clothing and, significantly, the specific style and quality of those heavy Persian carpets.
These were not your average French household items.
Not at all.
Yeah.
This realization instantly shifted the focus of the investigation from, a regional French homicide case to a full-blown international hunt.
So this is where Interpol steps in.
Exactly. They had to start scanning databases outside of France for potential matches, just hoping that someone, somewhere, had noticed these two men were missing.
That German connection was the only thread the French had, but it led them down a frustratingly complex path. While they were busy cataloging fibers and textiles down in Perpignan, way back near Frankfurt in the quiet town of Kelkheim, someone was quietly starting to worry.
And this brings us to Sandra D. She was the ex-girlfriend of the younger victim, who we now know was Heiko M. Sandra and Heiko had met while working at the Dialogue Museum in Frankfurt. It's an interesting detail. Both of them were blind.
And they stayed friends after they broke up.
A very close friendship, yes. So when Heiko failed to show up for a planned meeting in Marburg in November, and then just went completely dark.
No calls, no emails.
Nothing. Throughout all of December 2010, Sandra became intensely worried. She knew this total radio silence was completely out of character for him.
So she did what any concerned friend would do. She started reaching out.
Trying to contact both Heiko and his father, Dieter M., but neither responded.
And this is the exact moment the suspect, Heiko's younger brother and Dieter's son, Marcus M., steps into the picture.
He steps in and establishes his cover story. When Sandra contacted him, Marcus provided an immediate and, a seemingly plausible explanation.
Which was?
He said the father and son had simply packed up their motorhome and the bags and gone to Gran Canaria for the entire winter.
To do what?
To indulge their shared passion for cycling. He explained that they'd decided to spend the colder months cycling in a warmer climate.
And that story had some weight to it because of what Marcus did for a living.
Exactly. He worked as a self-employed mountain bike tour guide and was often traveling himself in Southern Europe. It made his story sound completely credible.
It sounds perfect, doesn't it? Two adults, known to travel, deciding to extend a vacation.
And that plausible explanation led to a massive, critical delay in the investigation.
So Sandra D., who is highly persistent, she went to the police.
She did. She went to the police near Kelkheim in December of 2010. But when the officers contacted Marcus M., who, confirmed the Gran Canaria story from the road, they just took his word at face value.
They didn't see it as suspicious.
Not at all. That's a crucial point in the timeline. The police, seeing no immediate indicators of foul play, decided they had two adults who had simply chosen an extended trip abroad.
Their conclusion was, what? Just wait.
Just wait for the spring. They assumed the men would simply return when the weather improved.
And Marcus helped sell this.
He did. He further cemented this facade by posting online, expressing a kind of mild, passive concern about their lack of communication.
Which made it look like he was also just waiting for them to check in.
Precisely.
And so 7 months of silence followed. 7 whole months.
7 months during which the bodies lay concealed in the French brush,
Sure.
and the perpetrator felt completely, utterly secure.
So why did it take so long to realize the depth of the deception?
Well, the winter eventually ended. The supposed cycling enthusiasts, they hadn't returned from their Spanish vacation.
And Sandra D. was still worried.
By late spring 2011, she was desperate. She went back to the police, arguing that this absence was just. It was simply untenable.
This is where investigators finally started becoming skeptical.
Finally, May 2011. The winter sports season was long over, and the men were still gone. And what's more telling,
What?
despite his public posts and his claimed worry, Marcus M. had never filed a missing person report himself. The police actually had to pressure him to file the report. It was a requirement for them to formally begin an investigation, and this was a full 6 months after the initial discovery in France.
So once the official report was finally filed, they searched the family home in Kelkheim?
Yes.
And initially, the staging was, well, it was meticulous. It looked exactly like a prepared vacation.
The scene perfectly supported Marcus M.'s story. Beds were stripped, which suggests a long absence.
Makes sense.
The refrigerator was defrosted and cleaned out. Even summer clothing was missing, implying they had packed for a warm weather destination.
A killer with meticulous planning skills had gone to great lengths to stage that home.
Absolutely.
But meticulous planning can often be undone by a moment of panic or, just a small oversight. What did they find that completely broke the narrative?
They found a single devastating red flag. Tucked away in a drawer was the father's wallet.
Ah.
And inside, they found his driver's license, his credit card, and his essential EC bank card.
Oh, no.
As the lead detective noted, nobody, and certainly not two adults, traveling for months to a foreign country, leaves for a trip abroad without these essential documents.
It was the tripwire.
It was the crucial tripwire that shattered the Gran Canaria cycling narrative and turned the missing persons case into a murder investigation.
So this single piece of evidence, it completely reframes the entire situation.
Completely.
The perpetrator established this vacation story not just to mislead the police, but to buy those 7 crucial months.
Time for the cleanup phase. Time to feel safe. Time to profit.
And time for the bodies to decompose and hinder the forensics.
It was a sophisticated, drawn-out deception.
Okay, so once the police realized the men hadn't traveled voluntarily and were, almost certainly dead, they focused immediately on the person who had the motive, the access, and who provided the false alibi.
Marcus M. The financial indicia of guilt just piled up alarmingly fast.
Let's start with the immediate context. Marcus M. wasn't just struggling financially, was he?
No, he was deeply indebted. He was facing significant personal financial issues. This provided the pressure point.
And his actions after they disappeared weren't those of a grieving relative.
Not at all. They demonstrated an immediate intent to capitalize on the tragedy. The fraudulent activity was widespread and just brazen.
We're talking about what, specifically?
Well, for starters, using his missing brother's credit card multiple times right after the disappearance.
And what was his excuse for that?
Yeah. When they confronted him, his explanation was utterly transparent. He claimed he was simply using the card to prompt his brother to call him back.
That does not hold up.
Not at all.
Why?
Especially not for a deeply indebted man.
And the deceit didn't stop there.
No. He traveled to the location he claimed his family went, Gran Canaria,
Right.
and checked into a hotel using his missing brother's identification documents.
So he's creating a paper trail.
It was a calculated move,
Yeah.
establishing a false paper trail to support the cycling vacation narrative he'd spun.
And then there was the pension.
Crucially, yes, he committed a crime of, immense treachery against his deceased disabled brother. He fraudulently collected Heiko's disability pension, known in Germany as Blindengeld.
Explain what that is.
It's government support designed specifically for the severely visually impaired to help them manage the significant extra costs of daily life.
So by forging documents to get this money?
He wasn't just stealing. He was exploiting the vulnerability of his own brother immediately after killing him.
Those actions collectively, they don't signal a worried relative. They signal a cold, clear-cut opportunist determined to liquidate and benefit from the family's absence.
Absolutely. He even went so far as to sell the family car and dispose of some of his brother's personal belongings in the trash.
The intention was clear.
The clear intention was to erase the lives of the victims and gain control over their assets.
And this leads us to the complex family dynamics at the home in Kelkheim.
Right. Marcus M. lived in the basement, essentially separated from the rest of the house. Upstairs, the father, Dieter M., lived with his elder son Heiko, who, as we said, was blind.
And Dieter M. was. How was he described?
Neighbors described him as sometimes pedantic, meticulous, prone to obsessiveness. Maybe he'd paint his garage door 3 times a year.
But that detail, it shows he was a man focused on maintenance and stability.
Yes, and that father was the central, essential support structure for the elder disabled son.
So that created a very tight, focused bond between Dieter and Heiko.
Very close bond. And Marcus, the younger traveling bike guide, he was often absent.
This dynamic, it fuels a classic theory of resentment in these kinds of homicides, doesn't it?
It really does. Marcus may have felt perpetually overlooked, marginalized, or, less prioritized because of the father's intense focus and devotion to the elder disabled brother.
He was the perpetual outsider living in the basement while the main family unit was upstairs.
Exactly.
But while resentment might provide the emotional fuel, the central, overwhelming motive here was pure, cold, calculated greed.
Abgear. Absolutely.
The family wasn't flamboyantly wealthy, but they were comfortable.
Certainly affluent for their specific location in the Taunus district. And the financial disparities between Marcus and the estate are just staggering.
So what was his income like?
Investigators found that Marcus M.'s income as a bike guide was minimal. It mostly covered board, lodging, and very little actual salary. He was running on fumes.
Meanwhile, the estate was substantial.
Very substantial. The father owned the house, which was valued at approximately 550,000 euros at the time.
And that wasn't all.
No. Beyond the house, he held significant capital assets, around 370 to 380,000 euros.
So Marcus M., who was deeply in debt, was looking at immediate access to an estate worth, roughly €1 million?
Roughly 1 million euros.
Huh.
This is a life-changing, debt-erasing, status-elevating amount of money. For him, the deaths were a business transaction.
And the man who orchestrated this transaction, he had this jarring dual personality, didn't he?
He did. Neighbors described him as friendly and open, the kind of person who always greeted you warmly.
But that wasn't the whole story.
No.
Yeah.
Professional acquaintances saw the real Marcus M. Those who worked with him saw a stark contrast.
What did they see?
A highly demanding, unfriendly, and utterly self-centered guide. He frequently overestimated his own abilities and drew criticism from clients and peers for his egoistic behavior.
This narcissistic core.
Where his own needs and status eclipsed all others is a crucial psychological insight here.
So, if we look at the financial desperation, the overwhelming motive of habgear, and this underpinning of deep egoism and narcissism, we have to ask.
Was he a killer simply because he was desperate? Or because his self-centered personality allowed him to view his family as nothing more than assets to be liquidated?
It's a chilling question.
It is, and it's what separates this case from a crime of passion. Narcissism, egoism, and financial opportunism don't necessarily make someone a killer. But in this context, they explain his complete lack of empathy for the victims and his immediate pivot to profiting from their deaths. The motive isn't just gain. It's the restoration of his own status and financial security.
At any cost.
At any cost.
Yeah.
That is the core of habgear.
To really grasp the calculation involved in Marcus M.'s actions, investigators had to understand the profile of a familial killer. The act of parricide killing one's parents or fratricide killing a sibling is extremely rare, but when it happens, the motives, while varied, they tend to fall into distinct, chilling categories.
Precisely. And we categorize these motivations because they often reveal the killer's mindset and the level of planning involved.
So on one hand, you have crimes driven by overwhelming mental health issues or a history of abuse.
Right. And on the other, you have the truly cold, calculated murders driven purely by self-interest and material gain, which is always the most unsettling profile.
So let's use some comparative case studies like the investigators would have to sort of place Marcus M. on this spectrum. First, let's look at a case defined by pure, uncontrollable rage and what's called overkill.
We can look at the tragic case in Farrell in 2017. A 14-year-old daughter and her 15-year-old friend murdered the mother. The brutality was just Shocking.
How so?
100 stab wounds. In profiling, we call this overkill or overwhackle.
This goes far beyond the force needed to actually kill someone.
So far beyond, it signals an intense, uncontrollable fury, deep personal hatred, and a need to express that rage through extreme violence. It often stems from personal conflict or a sudden devastating argument that just co-escalated wildly.
And that stands in stark contrast to Dieter and Heiko, who were killed efficiently with headshots. There was no overwhelming frenzy there.
It was quick and clinical. It suggests control.
So let's move to the second profile, the parasitic lifestyle killer.
For this, consider the case in Rostock on New Year's Day 2019. A 39-year-old man murdered his sleeping parents using a hammer and knife, inflicting 21 stab wounds on the father and 41 on the mother. This man had maintained a parasitic existence, living entirely dependent on his parents, refusing to work.
So the motive wasn't random rage.
No, it was likely triggered by an ultimatum from the parents, or it was the man's self-blame, projecting his own failures onto them.
That concept, blaming those who support you for your own failures, it starts to align a bit with Marcus M's dependency and his financial motivation, even if his method was less, outwardly frenzied.
Right, and this profile highlights the base motives, niedrige Beweggründe, and treachery, heimtückisch.
And these German legal concepts are vital here, aren't they?
They are. Heimtückisch, or treachery, means exploiting the victim's defenselessness or their trusting relationship.
Like killing your sleeping parents.
Or, in Marcus M's case, killing a trusting father and a blind brother who relied on the family for support. It perfectly fits the definition.
And niedrige Beweggründe, base motives.
That's applied when the motivation is purely selfish, like financial greed, habgier, or sadism, rather than, say, perceived self-defense or a sudden rage. These classifications are key because they define the severity of the crime in the German legal system.
Okay, moving on to the third profile, which seems to most closely mirror Marcus M's cold, calculated approach, the crime of calculated greed.
The 1997 Morschen Villa murder is a textbook example here. A couple was murdered, throat slit, and it was initially disguised as a robbery.
But it wasn't.
No. The suspects were the two adoptive daughters, Ines and Julia. They had already tried to poison the parents with rat poison before.
And when that didn't work,
they hired hitmen. Their sole motivation was securing the inheritance and taking over the family business.
What's truly disturbing about that case is the level of planning airtight alibis, using contract killers, and the completely unemotional behavior after the fact.
Completely. They immediately focused on inheriting the business.
But they made one classic mistake, which flagged the police.
Yes. They called to report their parents unreachable, despite having had almost no contact with them previously.
That uncharacteristic, heightened, false concern.
It signaled calculation rather than genuine surprise. And this behavior, meticulous staging, cold focus on the prize, and the inability to convincingly feign human emotion, is a strong indicator of a crime planned solely for gain.
And finally, let's look at the Hammer murder case from the 1980s, which illustrates how extreme narcissism can drive murder.
Right. Norbert Polke. He was a police officer who won a small lottery prize.
And it went to his head.
In a huge way.
Yeah.
Driven by overwhelming ego, he leveraged that money to maintain an incredibly high standard of living he just couldn't afford.
And when financial ruin loomed,
he turned to violent crime, bank robbery, and murder, using a sledgehammer on bank windows to steal cars for his escapes. When police finally closed in on him,
he killed his own wife, his children, and then himself. The lesson here is the absolute self-focus. Polka placed his own interest, his perceived status, and his desire to retain his lifestyle above the lives of everyone, including his own family.
That extreme egoism and narcissism is a powerful, calculated driving force for murder. And when we bridge this analysis back to Marcus M., we see he's a blend of these chilling elements.
The financial desperation of the parasitic lifestyle.
The cold, calculated planning we saw in the sister's case.
And the deep, status-driven self-centeredness of the Hammer murder.
Exactly. His method was controlled. His motive was pure financial access, driven by a personality that professional contacts already recognized as demanding and self-serving. He wasn't overwhelmed by rage. He was calculating a balance sheet.
So the psychological profile suggested capability and motive. But in September 2011, nearly a year after the bodies were first discovered, the The investigation found the link that transitioned the file from psychological speculation to hard evidence.
Yes, the DNA samples. Samples taken from the Kelkheim household finally matched the unidentified bodies found near Perpignan.
The missing persons case was definitively closed.
And the double murder investigation began in earnest.
It was lead detective Jochen Adler who delivered the news of the deaths to the only surviving relative, Marcus M. And the moment he was told his father and brother were definitively dead, investigators were watching him very, very closely.
As you'd expect. Marcus M., as expected, broke down, weeping theatrically. But both Adler and his colleague who were present, they shared the exact same uncomfortable feeling.
What was that?
The display of grief was staged and unnatural. They noted later that the tears seemed to stop and start on cue, lacking the genuine spontaneity of true emotional devastation.
But let's pause here. Isn't it possible he was simply a narcissistic person? And his grief, however awkward, was still real. Why were the investigators immediately skeptical based on his tears alone?
Well, they weren't basing it on the tears alone. They were basing it on the overwhelming accumulation of deceit that preceded that moment.
The pension fraud, the credit cards.
The fraudulent collection of the blending geld, the selling of the car, the false narratives. A genuinely grieving relative doesn't immediately engage in identity theft and asset liquidation.
So his staged performance.
It simply confirmed their growing suspicion that he was a manipulator trying to play the part of the victim.
Still, police didn't have the smoking gun.
Oh.
There was no weapon, no witness to the murder, and no direct DNA evidence linking Marcus M. to the bodies or the specific packaging. They knew he did it, but they needed a solid foundation for prosecution.
They needed what they called a strong chain of indicia.
This concept is crucial in German law, isn't it?
Absolutely. Since the suspect in Germany isn't required to testify or confess, prosecutors often have to rely entirely on circumstantial evidence.
So the chain of indicia is what?
It's powerful precisely because it means gathering so many small, seemingly disparate pieces of evidence, financial, chronological, and forensic, that when you link them all together, they eliminate every reasonable possibility except guilt.
It's almost better than a confession.
A perfect chain of indicia is often considered superior to a forced or flimsy confession.
So the confrontation began. Marcus M. was called in, but he was no longer a witness.
No. Now he was the suspect. When investigators confronted him with the financial evidence, the ID theft, the pension fraud, he continued to evade concrete questions.
He was described by investigators as squirming like an eel.
Unable to provide a coherent, honest account of his last contacts with his family.
So the focus then shifted to the timeline.
Yes. They established the last confirmed sighting of the father on November 11th, 2010. The brother, Heiko, was last seen participating in a hike on November 14th.
Wearing the very same clothes that were later found on his body in France?
Exactly.
This allowed them to hypothesize the likely date of death, November 15th, 2010.
And this date became the key to unlocking the physical link between Marcus M. and the disposal site.
And this is where modern technology provided the killer's undoing, despite all the careful staging.
His mobile phone records. They analyzed them for November 15th, and they placed him far from Kelkheim on a high-speed dash into France, precisely on the day the murders were suspected to have occurred.
Let's track that journey in detail. The phone records tracked his movement down the major A7 route toward Spain.
At 14.47, so just before 3 p.m., his phone logged a signal near Meul. That places him near the German-French border, confirming he was moving fast.
And it continues.
By 16:30, so 4:30 p.m., the cell data placed him near Arclange, deep inside France. He was traveling at such a velocity.
He was trying to put distance between himself and the murder scene.
So much so that French police actually clocked him speeding at 130 kilometers per hour and issued a control check.
So a speeding ticket actually helps the case.
It provided independent external confirmation of his precise location and speed on that afternoon.
And the trail ends late that evening, deep in the south of France.
Yes. The last signal recorded near the Spanish border in the Perpignan region was around 22.912, just after 10 p.m.
This places him squarely in the vicinity of the disposal sites, those remote locations, on the evening of November 15th.
Exactly.
And this link is absolutely critical because the disposal sites were not random, were they?
Not at all. They were located directly on a route Marcus M. frequently took as a professional bike guide.
So he had local knowledge.
The killer had essential local knowledge of secluded areas near this major travel corridor. Investigators theorized he'd driven south, maybe planning to cross into Spain and dispose of the bodies there.
But he got nervous.
He likely feared the heightened scrutiny of a border control check, particularly with two heavily concealed bodies in the vehicle. This probably led him to spontaneously decide to dump the bodies near Perpignan, using his specific knowledge of quiet, unobserved areas along his regular travel route.
So without a single witness or a direct camera feed, the cell data links the suspect, who stood to gain €1 million, to the exact time and area of the disposal, using his specific professional knowledge to find the secluded spots.
The chain of indicia was tightening into an iron grip.
Despite the powerful circumstantial evidence from the financial trails and cell data, the investigation still faced significant forensic hurdles, particularly about the murder scene itself. The bodies were in rough condition when the German forensic teams finally got a second look.
They were. The bodies had been autopsied in France, but the subsequent storage conditions were severely problematic.
What do you mean?
Well, instead of adequate cooling or freezing, which is necessary to preserve biological evidence, the bodies just continued to decompose.
So that poor storage complicated the exact determination of the time of death.
It did. It made it difficult for the prosecution to definitively lock the murder to that November 15th window, solely through biology. It allowed for a tiny sliver of doubt that the defense could try to exploit.
This forced the police to turn their attention back to the assumed scene of the crime, the family home in Kelkheim.
Right.
If the father and son were shot multiple times and they were in a residential area, why did no neighbors hear anything? This was the mystery of the quiet murder.
And the ballistics investigation provided the key. Forensic specialists noted the absolute absence of powder residue, or Schmackeblagerung, on the skull bones.
This is a highly technical detail, but it's immensely important.
It is. In a close range or contact shot without suppression, unburned powder particles and gases always deposit at the entry point. Their absence spoke volumes.
So the lack of residue rules out an open, unsilenced shot fired at close range. What does it suggest about the killer's method?
It suggests the shots were either fired from a substantial distance, which is highly improbable for a domestic cleanup scenario, or the sound and the powder residue were deliberately dampened. And how do you do that? Either by using a silencer, which absorbs the combustion gases and particles,
Or something more makeshift.
or by firing through a thick, dense object like a pillow, a heavy blanket, or in some documented cases, even a loaf of bread, which acts as a surprisingly effective temporary suppressor and completely absorbs the gunpowder particles.
This strongly supports the theory of a planned, execution-style murder committed inside the house.
Carried out with deliberate suppression to ensure silence and minimize evidence transfer.
And the state of the home supported this cleanup theory.
It did. The father's apartment upstairs was found to be meticulously cleaned. Every surface had been gone over.
Which was specious in itself.
It totally contrasted with the upstairs apartment of the victim Heiko, which was in a natural state of disarray for someone who had simply left for a long trip without cleaning.
And Marcus M., living in the basement, had the access and the time to conduct this painstaking cleanup over 7 months.
Systematically destroying any blood spatter or DNA evidence that would have linked the crime directly to the home. The physical evidence wasn't just missing, it was removed by the perpetrator.
And this brings us to the final, brilliant piece of observation. Investigators noticed a strange detail about the furnishings.
Yes. Under the living room table, there was one specific, non-matching carpet.
And they theorized
that a highly valuable Persian carpet, one that would have actually fit the house's upscale Baroque-style furnishings, was missing. And their theory was that missing, valuable carpet had been used to wrap the bodies found 1,000 kilometers away.
This is where the whole case pivots from circumstantial to definitive. The theory required absolute proof.
So they called in the textile fiber specialist, Angelika Schwetz, to search for microscopic fibers. This is where it gets really interesting.
We need to understand the scientific principle of fiber transfer here, which is why this evidence is so devastating.
Right. When a heavy carpet lies on a floor, especially a hardwood or stone subfloor, its fibers naturally transfer and become mechanically attached to the surface underneath.
Especially in areas that are hard to clean.
Exactly. Like under the heavy, immovable legs of a chair or a table, or deep in the corners where the floor meets the wall.
Even the most meticulous cleanup using mops or vacuums often misses these minute contact points.
Because the fibers are trapped under pressure or deep in the crevices.
So the forensic expert secured tiny, almost invisible fiber samples from those hard-to-clean spots on the subfloor of the Kelkheim house.
And these fibers, despite being microscopic, carry a unique signature based on dye, composition, and weave. They were comparing a few threads from a German floor to the heavy carpet wrapping the bodies in France.
And the result was definitive.
It was. The microscopic fibers secured from the subfloor of the Kelkheim home matched the fibers of the Persian carpets used to wrap the bodies found near Perpignan, France.
The probability of that being a coincidence is
Negligible. The probability of two different carpets having an identical fiber signature and placement in separate locations is basically zero.
This was the absolute impossibility of coincidence that the prosecution needed.
The victims, killed and dumped far away, just happened to be wrapped in the specific, unique Persian carpets that originated from their own home.
A home occupied only by the single suspect, with €1 million motive and no alibi for the crucial night.
The fiber evidence was the strongest, final link needed to complete the chain of indicia and prove the scene of the crime.
The weight of the circumstantial and forensic evidence was overwhelming. Marcus M. was arrested on October 25, 2011.
Investigators chose the early morning around 6 a.m. to minimize the chance of resistance.
And the anecdote from the arrest itself, it perfectly encapsulates the extreme narcissism we've been talking about.
It really does. When investigators woke him up, arrested him, and prepared to take him away, Marcus M. actually asked if he could take a moment to make his bed before they put on the handcuffs.
You're kidding.
No. His world was crashing down around him. He was facing life imprisonment for double murder, and his primary concern was maintaining the appearance of order in his room.
The trial in Frankfurt began in September 2012 and lasted a grueling 46 days.
And throughout the entire process, Marcus M. continuously denied the charges, sticking to the bitter end with the narrative of his innocence.
Court observers found his behavior to be highly revealing.
They did. He was theatrical and deeply self-involved, attempting to manipulate the courtroom. He employed what were described as cheap effects.
Such as?
At one point, displaying a picture of his dead brother and calling for a moment of silence in court, or displaying what were described as staged wine cramps.
This behavior strongly cemented the profile of a narcissistic individual obsessed with maintaining a specific, controlled image, even when facing the collapse of his life.
Exactly.
In April 2013, the Frankfurt Regional Court delivered its verdict. Marcus M. was convicted of double murder, based specifically on the legal concepts of treachery heimtückisch and base motives niedrige Beweggründe.
Namely, financial gain. Habgier.
And importantly, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with special severity of guilt.
This is a critical legal addition in Germany. The finding of special severity effectively recognizes the extremely cold and calculated nature of the crime.
And it makes automatic parole after 15 years highly improbable.
It was recognition that this was not a crime of passion or sudden impulse, but a meticulously planned execution for profit.
Even after conviction, Marcus M. continued to claim he was a victim of justice, refusing to accept responsibility for the murder of his father and his blind brother.
And this brings us back to that question of truth. When a person consciously suppresses the reality of a crime for so long, going to such theatrical lengths to deny it, does that act of denial eventually become a self-protective psychological barrier?
Does the lie become so necessary to their self-identity that they genuinely find it difficult, if not impossible, to confront the horrific truth of what they have done?
It's a terrifying example of ego protecting itself, even from reality.
A deeply unsettling thought, considering the planning and staging that defined this crime. The case of the silent killer and the telling carpet was ultimately solved not by a confession, not by a witness to the shooting, but by collecting small, persistent fragments of evidence.
A misplaced wallet? Suspicious banking?
The timing of a speeding ticket captured by cell data.
And finally, microscopic textile fibers that tied a German home to a French field. The ability of forensic science to connect the smallest particles to the largest crimes is constantly evolving.
But the core principle remains the same.
The killer always takes something and leaves something.
And that leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to mull over. How often do we overlook the smallest, most mundane details in our own lives? The tiny overlooked fragments, a thread on the carpet, a misplaced key, a strange bank charge, when those details could actually hold the key to the biggest secrets. Think about that the next time you sweep the floor.